Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Number to call if you want to join the conversation, 888-589-8840. You may have seen this story, and I want to make a comment about the Constitution. Remember, my definition of a patriot is a man with a Bible in one hand and a Constitution in the other. The Bible is our guidebook for all of life. The Constitution, a much more limited role, but it is our guidebook for our political life. And if we don't like what's in the Constitution, then we amend it. We don't ignore it. We don't set it aside. We don't look for some judge to invent some unwritten right in there. We amend it. We go through the process to do it. If we don't like it, and we've done that 27 times, we've tried to improve it 27 times. Now, a lot of those amendments, in my judgment, were not improvements. The 16th Amendment, income tax thing, I think anybody in America would say that was a terrible idea. 17th Amendment, direct election of senators, another terrible idea, and so forth and so on. But the point is, if there's something about the Constitution you don't like, you can amend it, but the Constitution means what the founders intended for it to mean. That's what it means. Doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't mean anything you want it to mean. It doesn't mean whatever some creative judge can come up with and insert into some kind of a ruling. It means what the founding fathers intended it to mean. Now, when you go to the First Amendment, for instance, we've talked about this before, so I'm not going to belabor this, but it's very, very clear when the founding fathers used the word religion in the First Amendment, they were referring to Christianity. They were just talking about Christianity. They were thinking about Christianity. They were trying to establish public policy for the federal government with regard to Christianity. Now, one of the evidences of this, the wording that they finally settled on, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the language that they finally wound up with. But they spent a day working on the precise language of the First Amendment, and I want to give you some of the other suggested wordings for the First Amendment. These were suggested, and they were rejected for one reason or another. But what you see as you listen to the various alternatives that were proposed, you can get a real good feel for what they were aiming at. What was the target here? And the target specifically was to deal with expressions of Christianity. Here's the one that James Madison suggested: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a national religion. Now remember, establishment had a very specific meaning at that time. It meant to pick one Christian denomination and make it the official church of the state, grant it preference in law, require people to support it with their taxes. That is what an established church is. It has preference in law. People are required to support it with their taxes. And that's what Congress is prohibited from doing in the United States. But establishment at that time specifically meant picking a Christian denomination. So even the word establishment tells you that they're talking about Christian denominations here. That's what they had in England. The Anglican Church was the established Church of England. It was identified in law as the Church of England. It had preference in law, and you had to support it with your tax dollars. And that was an established church. And the founders said, we're not going to let the central government make the same mistake here. So even the word establishment is specifically a word referring to Christian denominations. Now, here is another alternative that was proposed on that day back in 1789. Congress shall make no law establishing any religious denomination. Now, what's a denomination? That's an expression, a variety of Christianity. Here was a third suggestion. Congress shall make no law establishing any particular denomination. What's the word denomination refer to? It refers to Christian churches. You got the Methodist denomination, and you have the Baptist denomination, you have the Episcopalian denomination, and you have the Presbyterian denomination. These are specifically terms that refer to Christian churches. Here's a fourth suggestion. Congress shall make no law establishing any particular denomination in preference to others. Again, denomination, that's a word referring to Christian groups or networks like the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Congregationalists and the Baptists and so forth. Now here's George Mason, the father of the Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights largely because of George Mason. If my memory serves, George Mason would not sign the Constitution because it did not have a Bill of Rights in it. He said, I'm not going to sign anything that doesn't have some kind of Bill of Rights that limits the federal government, the central government, and tells it what it cannot do to the American people. Now, here is his wording. George Mason, father of the First Amendment, father of the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make, here's the prohibition, that no particular sect or society of Christians ought to be favored or established by law in preference to others. So George Mason made it very, very clear that what they were trying to do was to prevent the central government from picking one Christian denomination and giving it a favored status in law and the American landscape over other Christian denominations. So they were specifically dealing with Christianity. They weren't even thinking about other religions. Now here's what Joseph Story said. I've read this before, but it bears repeating. Eminent historian, longest serving associate justice in the history of the Supreme Court. And he writes in his history of the Constitution, the earliest and most definitive history of the Constitution. Listen to this. The real object of the First Amendment was not to countenance, which means to embrace, to think about, to face, to promote. It was not to countenance, much less to advance Mohammedanism or Judaism or infidelity, by which he meant atheism. So he says, look, the object of the First Amendment was not even to deal with Mohammedanism or Judaism or atheism. We were aware of them. They were out there. We knew they were out there in the ether. We dealt with the jihadists, the Barbary pirates, so we knew what the Muslims could do. We were aware of Islam. But we were not dealing with that in the First Amendment. We weren't countenancing, we weren't facing, we weren't dealing with, we weren't talking about, we weren't even thinking about Islam or Judaism or atheism. What we were doing was making a commitment to exclude all rivalry among Christian sects and to prevent any national ecclesiastical patronage of the national government. Listen to that. That's the purpose of the First Amendment, to exclude all rivalry among Christian sects. So now this is my own personal view, and a lot of people see it differently, and the Supreme Court's mangled the First Amendment completely out of all recognition. But here's the point. The purpose of the First Amendment was to protect the free exercise of the Christian faith. That was its object. That was its purpose. It wasn't providing shelter or cover for Islam or for Judaism or for atheism. Those issues were to be left entirely to the states. The states, under the Constitution as the founders gave it to us, they can embrace Islam or they can prohibit Islam. They can allow the building of mosques, they can prohibit it. They can allow for monuments to Satan or they can prohibit them, which is what Florida ought to do. Right back.